Oh dear. Here we go again. Today's show is kicking off in the morning, bright and early, with some very interesting conversation that was brought up on the JIC show in Quebec. Today we are talking about a superstar in the NHL, a generational player, arguably a top 5 guy all time, and how he could be on the move, I don't know, man. Let's go out there and look at this piece that is very self-explanatory, just based off of the title. It's translated from French into English, and it was published yesterday. Here are 3 possible trade destinations for Sidney Crosby. Now, I don't think anybody is clicking on this video or listening or reading this article or whatever and thinking to themselves, oh yeah, Crosby's gonna get traded. Like, I don't think anybody's actually taking the money line on this. I don't think anybody's taking the over-under on this. I don't think anybody's thinking about this. It's just a hypothetical idea, right? Sidney Crosby, of all people, is Sidney freaking Crosby. There's really nothing else to say beyond that, and I've made that point known several times in all the videos we have made talking about a Sid the Kid trade, because, believe me, this is something that we have talked about kind of extensively, not really like too deeply, but it has popped up once in a while. Sidney Crosby at 36 years old is still over a point per game. It's kind of astounding how consistent he's been throughout his entire career. But this article on TVA has a very interesting idea behind it, and I thought it'd be fun to highlight some of these ideas in a video. So, let's go out there and read this article. The link will be in the description. It's translated from French into English, by the way. We're 3 weeks away from the NHL's trade deadline. On Thursday night, if the Habs had beaten the Rangers and the Penguins had lost in Chicago, the Habs would have overtaken the Penguins in the Eastern Conference standings. The point is that the Penguins find themselves 5 points from last place, giving access to the end-of-season playoffs in the East. I have no idea what that last sentence means, but Google Translate will just leave it to a lost in translation error. The article in the next few paragraphs essentially says that Sidney Crosby is old, and then it talks about how the Pittsburgh Penguins are old. Malkin, Carlsson, Letang, you know the drill. The article goes over these names. The article talks about Kyle Dubas. It talks about how he is trying to stretch everything so thinly for these guys towards the end of their careers. And Crosby, with 34 points, with his sense of competition and his formidable physical condition, has exceptional value on the trade market. I like how it says transaction market. That's really a lost in translation thing. Would he agree to leave the organization that made him the best player in the world for so long and a 3-time Stanley Cup winner? It'll be his decision, but let's say he agrees to lift his no-movement clause. Where would his possible destinations be? JIC then goes out there and talks about how I'd be surprised if he wanted to expose himself to the long trips of a Western team. He has another season left in his contract next year, and maybe the club which will acquire his services is likely to try to retain him for 2 or 3 more years, except maybe for a destination like Colorado when his best friend in the business outside of his teammates, Nathan MacKinnon, is there. The fit would be amazing in Colorado, and I think that's the only place that Crosby would be willing to move to out west. So, sorry Vancouver Canucks fans, we did talk about this idea in a video a few weeks ago, but Sidney Crosby and the Western Canadian dream does not seem like a possibility. It doesn't really seem like something that Sid would be interested in, according to what this article proposes. Of course, the article could very well be wrong. Like, there is an idea or a possibility that says, oh yeah, Crosby actually does want to come to Vancouver or Edmonton or whichever Western team that's out here. Pick a name out of a hat, why don't you? But the article then goes out there and talks about their own, let's just say, major contenders, if you wanted to say that. Let's continue on with the piece here. 2 obvious choices. In the East, there are 2 obvious choices for Crosby: Boston and New York. The Bruins and Rangers are in the window of opportunity for the Stanley Cup, and that's what Sidney Crosby may be looking for if he agrees to leave Pittsburgh. And then the article goes out there and talks about Montreal, which has been an idea we talked about a few times here, but we're not gonna dive too deeply into that. It even says at the end here, yeah, no, Kent Hughes is not going to do something like that. That's not going to happen. Montreal's not going to get Sid the Kid. But either way, when it comes to these 2 teams, Boston and New York, Is this not just the most boring example of what happens when a star player gets on the market, isn't it? Not that Sidney Crosby is on the market, we all acknowledge that he's not going to be there unless he decides himself that he wants to, but Sidney Crosby on the Bruins, eh? At least he's in a black and yellow team. At least the jersey color change won't be too drastic, but seriously, thinking about how good the Boston Bruins have been this season without Bergeron and without Krejci, how Pavel Zacha, of all people, has stepped up and become a number one center on this team. There's a lot of really good talent with the Boston Bruins this year that is very surprising. So the fact that one of the best players of all time is being proposed as a potential ad. I mean, hey, you thought the Bruins were good now? Wait till you see Sidney Crosby playing with David Pastrnak. Wait till you'll see Sidney Crosby playing with Marchand, because that was a thing that happened a few years ago, actually. Remember before Brad Marchand was, known as a superstar in the NHL like he is today? During, the mid-2010s-ish, where he played with Sidney Crosby on that line with Team Canada at the World Cup of Hockey? Yeah. That's a throwback, dude. Almost 8 years ago, which is kind of nuts when you really think about it, but still, there has been some chemistry with Crosby and Marchand from a decade ago, if you wanted to try to rekindle that as these two guys are heading towards the latter stages of their careers, then, hey, I don't see why Boston doesn't do this. They've always been in the business of going big or going home, right? So if Sidney Crosby is in a possible situation where he'd want to go to B-Town, then that actually sounds like a cool idea. Of course, the rest of the league would probably hate it, but hey, at least it makes sense. And then for the New York Rangers, this article pretty much says that New York is the biggest market, and they've gotten the Messiers and the Gretzkys and everything, so they could do it again. And honestly, it's kind of a boring answer, but it is one that also does make sense. The Rangers have been kind of needing some center depth, and I'm saying that fully knowing that Mika Zibanejad is a good player. It's just, hey, for all the amount of complaining that Rangers fans do on a given night about how Mika Zibanejad doesn't do anything 5-on-5, it does kind of open the idea up that there could be some sort of a move that would be seen as okay. That would be seen as possible if you were to force your hand at it. So if Sidney Crosby, with some sort of a guarantee to play next year, and potentially even beyond that if you sign him to an extension, if he is available in the market, then there's no reason why a team like the Rangers wouldn't be all over this. So my question to Rangers and Bruins fans is, if Sidney Crosby were available tomorrow, if he was available in the trade deadline market and he wanted to go to your team, he'd be willing to waive to your team, what's the max that you give up for him? You'd have to give up picks, you'd have to give up prospects, you'd have to give up probably somebody on your roster right now to fill in the spot that Crosby would be going in to on your lineup. So where do those assets lie? Are you talking about multiple firsts? Are you talking about multiple of your top prospects? For a team like the Bruins, you don't have many top prospects, so how does that change the dynamic of how you acquire this player? Do you trade away just a Pavel Zacha straight up? Say, hey, we'll do this top-line center for top-line center, and we'll add some extra picks and other things on top of that to make this trade look pretty. If you're a Pittsburgh fan, what is the minimum you accept from any other team if it comes to a Sidney Crosby trade? Because realistically, if you're trading away Sidney Crosby, you are starting from scratch. You are probably in a position to trade away Malkin. You're probably in a position to trade away Chris Letang. You're probably in a position to hopefully make a trade with Erik Karlsson, but that's tough to happen because, he's very expensive. But the best choice of action, I think, for the Pittsburgh Penguins, if you were to consider trading Crosby, would to be consider trading everybody. Just start from scratch. Do the Mario Lemieux thing all over again. Let him leave, and then build through the draft by getting the next generational talent in 2026, 2027, whenever that is. And Sidney Crosby could be the catalyst in getting extra young guys and assets to bolster that opportunity. So does this make sense? Do you think the Bees and the Rangers are two teams that make the most sense for a Sidney Crosby trade? If you're a fan of any of these squads that we had talked about, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. The article will be linked in the description as well if you want to read that at your own content. But I hope you enjoyed this Vishal 99, and bye.